Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech, protected.
The following is an independently produced program. The views and opinions expressed are entirely those of the producer and do not reflect those of Falls Area Community Television, its staff, or board of directors. Take a deep breath. Remember this is public access and carry on.
Secrets in the shadows, lost and found. Truth in every echo, loud and clear. Keep on with the long road, no more fear. In the halls of power, whispers grow. Every secret got beneath the undertone. Honor stories hidden in the glass. On this long road, in the truth we trust.
Hello, welcome to The Long Road. I'm your host, Chris Roberts. And my goal today is to help convince you that the history you were taught was far, far from being complete. We have people in the White House and the current administration are doing their best to rewrite history. They have stated that the American history has too much DEI in it. You know what? American history talks about the accomplishments of women, talks the accomplishment of immigrants, Asians, Chinese. It talks about slavery. It talks about prison labor. You know, all those things like that should not be in the American history. That's what the Secretary of Education, that's what she said about the history that's being taught in the United States. Then the Secretary of Defense comes out and says, you know, we have a naval ship named after a Navy lieutenant who was serving in San Francisco and he got shot down, killed. He was cold-blooded murder, and his only crime was he was a gay man. And so we've been saying that the Secretary of Defense says the only reason the ship was named after him was he was a gay person, and that fell under DEI, so that name must be stripped from the bow and the aft end of that ship. Okay, history is history. And once history escapes, no matter how much you try, you can't put it back in the box. Plain and simple. We cannot go back to American history when American history was all about the WASP. White Protestant Anglo-Saxon men. If you weren't a white Anglo-Saxon male, you weren't nobody. In a lot of cases, you couldn't even vote. Hey, you don't have property. Nope. Okay, the Supreme Court says we have to allow you to vote. Okay. I remember when I first started voting in Keene, I had to pay a poll tax. I think it was like $10. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Why do I have to pay to vote? Well, that's a poll tax. So they did that around the country. Well, for a lot of people, $10 was a lot of money, and they couldn't afford to pay it, so they forfeited the right to vote. We cannot go back, and no matter how much the current leadership says, we are not going back. This is going to be a temporary blip. Okay? while they're trying to rewrite history, history is observing them. History will not be very kind to the people that are in American leadership right now. Donald Trump is no Kennedy. Donald Trump is no Roosevelt. Donald Trump is no Lincoln. Donald Trump is no Washington. Every single of those individuals were outstanding people. They were moral people. It wasn't about them. It was about the whole. And they all gave up part of themselves to be part of that whole. And if you look back at those four people, those four presidents that always finish in the top 10, John Kennedy was assassinated. Teddy Roosevelt died young. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. It's a lot of hard work to subordinate yourself to the people that you are trying to lead and create a better life for. Anybody can be egotistic and be about me, or wear a MAGA hat or post on an app every day. Yeah. But history isn't going to be nice to him. History is going to be even worse to the members in Congress and the members in the Senate that became lackeys, that just follow him, who are afraid to say the emperor has no clothes, but they will do whatever the emperor tells them to do. But what are they going to do when the emperor's gone? You got to remember, when you go to the French Revolution, there was a group of people that were there and helped leading the revolution. But as the revolution grew and it changed and people realized what's going on, some of the people that were way up here in high status positions lost their heads. Okay? It's amazing how people will sell their soul to get into a really good position. But what did they do when the devil comes back and says, I want my due, and I want it now? That's something they're going to have to live with. That's something their children and their grandchildren are going to have to live with. What legacy is a lot of these individuals leaving for their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren? Okay? And so, and to be fair, the Democrats, they're much worse. Oh, we want Biden. We're not going to tell anybody that Biden is in decline because we don't care about Biden. We care about our self-interest. We like the jobs. We like the position. We like the power. Who cares? We can make Biden the Wizard of Oz. We can hide him behind a curtain and we can put up smoke and amplify his voice, but no one ever gets to see the wizard, but everybody else gets to enjoy being around the wizard. Okay? The American people are telling the Democrats, we don't want all these immigrants. We want these immigrants shipped out. Okay? If you don't work with the person in charge, you have no input. and all you're doing is left complaining. What are you complaining? Your complaints go direct opposite of the American people. Yes, some people are going to be caught up in this sweep. Yes, a lot of good law, they broke the law to get here, but a lot of good people who have been law-abiding, productive members contributing to their community are going to get swept up and sent home. And they may be sent home to a place they never been. Hey, okay, the guy who, the jerk who decides to try to flamethrow those, the Jewish people who are supporting the hostages in Gaza. Okay? Well, I think he has a wife and 5 children, but I can't remember what country he's from, whether he's from Egypt, but only lived there like 3 years, but he lived in someplace else. So the wife and the 5 children are getting ready to be deported. I don't even know if they speak Arabic. That can be pretty bad if you, for example, got deported to Egypt and your kids may have been born in the United States, so they're not Egyptian citizens and they don't speak Arabic. Pretty bad problem. Okay, so you go in, look at the governor of Massachusetts. Oh, they're coming in and they took 1,500 and we found some good people being caught up. Well, Governor Healy, if you had worked with ICE and some of them and show them where the bad people are, these good people wouldn't have got caught up. If your judges weren't releasing them so they wouldn't be turned over to ICE, the good people wouldn't be caught up. Okay? But as far as when you look at it, the American people overall do not care about the immigrant from Maryland. No matter how much Senator Schumer or some AOC or some of the other ones say, people in America go into their daily lives, dealing with their daily struggles, and they don't give a crap about what happened to that guy. Well, but the guy also beat his wife. What? Okay, that means you're getting deported. Okay, so there's a bunch of good people going to be caught up. And here it is. Why is the Democratic leadership and elected officials complaining and really bitching about every time, oh, this illegal should not have gone. This illegal should not have gone. Then the ICE says, well, he was convicted of child molestation. He was convicted of drunk driving a few times. He was convicted of domestic battery. Who, in their right mind, in a leadership position, goes out and defends people with criminal backgrounds such as that, felonies, illegals, say, no, you should not be sending them back to their country. They need to stay in our country. And then have the taxpayers of our country support them while the big beautiful bill is saying, you know what? Let's take $700 billion from Medicaid. Let's take $300 billion from food stamps. Democratic Party has no leadership, no direction. They're like a ship in the middle of in the Gulf of Mexico during a hurricane with no rudder and the motor is dead. They change every time there's a gust of wind. They have no direction. The Republican Party, they got nothing there. They don't have leadership. They got a bunch of people that go in and kiss the king's ring. He thinks he's a king, but he's not a king. But these guys are kissing, guys and women are kissing the king's ring. Everything could change the next election cycle. So, July, August, September, October, November, in 17 months, we're going to have an election. And if the Democrats do anything possibly minute right, they can take over the House. And then we have divided government. And through history has shown, divided government works pretty good. I know that was tirade, but it irritates me that no one wants to step up and be a leader. No one. Well, yes, I will give you one example so far that I've seen of leadership. You know how there's like 3 or 4 big law firms that kowtow down to President Trump? Yes, we'll get rid of these people, lawyers that you don't like. We'll do this, we won't do this. And oh yeah, we're going to donate millions and millions of pro bono money. And you say, well, this is what we'll do. This is such an easy thing. Yeah, of course, it's some money. But you know what? We keep Trump off our butt. Well, I read a pretty interesting article yesterday. So far, 11 major corporations have basically gone to these companies, these big law firms that sold their soul to President Trump and said, we're out of here. Oracle says, nope. They took all their business and went to one of the law firms that told Trump, BS, we're not selling our soul to you. Coca-Cola, same thing. McDonald's, same thing. 11 of major companies. One was a big, what do you call those things? It's like BlackRock, but it's not BlackRock, but it's kind of a venture capital. So they took McDonald's, they took tens of millions of dollars away from the individuals that sold their soul to the president. And all I can think of was these 3 or 4 big law firms that have hundreds of associates, if not thousands, where people from Harvard Law, Stanford Law, Yale compete to get one of these coveted positions. They had their Bud Light moment. And I doubt if they will ever recover. Because when you sell your soul, there's always a price to pay. You may think that you only have to pay back the devil, but there's other people out there that don't want to get involved with the devil, so they're taking their toys and going someplace else. They're taking their toys and going to someone they can trust. Because once you sell your soul, it's like integrity. You never get it back. Now to get to where I was, the original part on it, this. We have been taught a certain type of history. And, okay, but let's go and think. Okay, if I want to be a history teacher, say at the high school, so I go to college, say I go to King State College, I'm studying to be a teacher and I want to be a history teacher. So in 4 years, I have to take about 240 to 280 hours of history. Not credits, I'm talking about hours. Because credits, you need to take about 20 credits. So that's 5 courses in there. Okay, so bingo, we'll make it 240 for that 240 hours of, that's classroom hours, 240. Okay, so that 240, think about it. That is 6 weeks. Think of all American history and think of how much you can consume and understand and be able to relate to it and then teach it to the students. You get 6 weeks. That's all you get. In 4 years, you will spend 6 weeks with professors. Okay? So you don't know what to do. So you only learn what the professor teaches you. Oh, bingo. Okay. Then you go apply for a job. I want to teach in Keene. Oh, okay. I'll just have to modify my 6 weeks of information to match the community of Keene. So the community of Keene is, most of my stuff will be more on the liberal side. Okay? I may pick some other communities and go, oh, mine has to be more on the conservative side. So you go to school for 6 weeks, you spend 6 weeks, equivalent of 6 weeks in classroom with a professor. You are given this information, then you graduate and you go apply for a job. Okay, it doesn't matter what you learned or what was dumped in your brain for those 6 weeks. When you go through a job interview to become a teacher, you go, this is what they want, so this is what I'm going to feed them. I'm going to feed them based on the history books that they do. Bingo. So again, so I get the job. I feed the students what they expected. The community wants them to learn. So if it's a year-long class, the students may get 150 hours. I'm going, 150 hours, that's an awful lot of time, is it? That's less than 4 weeks of work. Less than 4 weeks over the course of the year to learn history. So you can go to college and so that cycle goes around and around. We don't have a lot of history teachers that go back to school to get their master's degree and really get in depth in history. If I want to be a history major, which I was, I have to spend twice as much time studying history than a history teacher, a high school history teacher. I had to take these higher level courses. The history of Germany, the history of Ireland. So you start going into in-depth. So a lot of history majors don't ever go into teaching, but someone who learns half as much as me goes into teaching. And so what happens? How does Americans learn history? History is what we're told it is. And what happens is, if my history teacher or my college professor in a liberal town, say King State, well, King State's in between, but take a real liberal college in Massachusetts, bingo, oh yeah, what my professor taught me are factual. If I'm in King State, what my professors taught me is factual. If I'm in Hinsdale or Liberty, what my professors taught me are factual. But then you go and say, how can everybody be factual? Oh, it's simple. You hand pick your facts. And you only pick facts that support your opinion. The facts that take your opinion to reality, that get people to believe. Okay? We're taught anybody in the United States can pull themselves up on bootstraps and just make it to the top. It seems like every single politician, movie star, I was really poor and I had to do this. I was sexually abused. Those are things that you really don't want to have to happen to children. And it's amazing, but they want us to feel sorry for them for the harsh upbringing they have been. It's amazing how many people talk about their harsh upbringing, but they graduate from Ivy League schools. That's pretty harsh, isn't it? So, what about America? Who built America? Has America changed much? Is the middle class dying off? Or was the middle class just a blip in history? 42 to 73. We were the only game in the world. If the rest of the world was being destroyed, we were having we couldn't eat as much butter and bacon and eggs as we wanted. We couldn't drive as much as we wanted. We couldn't buy a brand new car. But hey, we didn't have to worry about 200, 300, 400 planes flying over, bombers and dropping stuff. All those kind of stuff. So we prospered and we made all kinds of money. We were safe. We could send people to college. We could do all this stuff. But history talks about how great that happened and how all that brought up. But what about the complete history? What about people going to the Library of Congress? What about a history teacher saying to American history kids in the class and goes, you know what? I want you to go and pick a history book out of the Library of Congress, say Civil War, you Spanish-American War, you Mexican War, you the Indian Wars. Read it. You know, pick a book that was written in that era, not the book that was written in 2020, or not what you're seeing on TV or the movies, but pick a book in there, and then at the end of the year, you're going to have to give a presentation to the rest of the class. You know what's the funny part about that? If there's 30 kids in their class and all 30 kids have to give a presentation, those 30 kids will impart more knowledge than their teacher learned in college. Who would thunk it? That's the way school used to be. But, okay, I had from National Institute of Health Public Access. I got to go there a lot. And what I pulled out is immigration and the American Industrial Revolution from 1880 to 1920. Okay, giving you an example of some of the things. Manufacturing. Okay, in 1880, when the agricultural frontier had largely disappeared, almost half of American workers were still farming, and only 1 in 7 people, less than 15%, worked in manufacturing of any sort. So the farming kind of, in 1880, it was it. It was slowing down, wasn't much growth. But 6 out of every 7 people still worked on the farm or around the farm. Only 15% of the people in America were working in manufacturing of any sort. And a bunch of them is manufacturing, hey, I can be making wagon wheels. And this really small type of manufacturing. How did this change? In 1909, the share of manufacturing horsepower in the United States produced by electrical motors was 23%. 23%. And so that makes manufacturing pretty inefficient. And it's going, how do you manufacture? How do you do assembly lines? How do you do a bunch of this stuff? Well, 20 years later, of the manufacturing, where it's Ford or General Electric or any of these things, 77% of the horsepower used to produce goods in manufacturing was through electric power. Okay, one of the reasons now is you've got, okay, you may have Manchester. They may be getting electric power produced by using the water from the rivers. So manufacturing in places like that had to be by rivers. But electricity came. Electricity was able to produce horsepower. So now places like Claremont, Manchester, Lowell, Springfield, there was really not much need for them. And for example, in the manufacturing sector, there was 2.5 million people working in the manufacture in 1880. And in 1920, there was over 10 million. The pace of rural to urban migration of the native born picked up during this era, but domestic urban migration was dwarfed by the flood of immigrants to cities. From 1880 to 1920, the number of foreign-born increased from almost 7 million to almost 14 million. So in a matter of 40 years, you have 7 million people in the United States that were born overseas to 14 million in 1920. And as a result of that, most of them went to places like New York, Chicago, Boston, Cleveland, San Francisco, Buffalo, Milwaukee, Detroit. Detroit automobiles, Milwaukee beer. So they had a whole Chicago, the slaughterhouses. The most commonly cited reason for the rapid American industrial revolutions are the abundance of mineral resources, technology, and evolution of American system manufacturing, railroads, and lower costs of transportation, education, and human resources. That's what is talked about in college. That's what they tell you in high school. America had so much natural resources. That was all the wealth. And then America created this great education system. And so then America had this big industrial revolution that was fueled by the natural resources but the vast majority of all this stuff was accomplished by native-born white Americans. Whew. When I was high school, I never questioned it. The teacher had to know. I was in college, I questioned some, but I never thought about it. Well, the role of immigration is summarized in a single paragraph. There are studies that conclude that the flood of immigrants in the late 19th and early 20th centuries had an adverse effect on the per capita economic growth, the wages of native workers, and diverted domestic migration away from the industrial cities. So, basically, if all these lowlifes from 1880 to 1920 hadn't come into the United States, native-born white Americans would be making more money. Native-born white Americans would have gone taking these jobs. And it diverted domestic migration away from industrial cities, saying these native-born white Americans on the farm, the second, third, fourth son who got nothing had to work at these peanut paying jobs. They couldn't come to the city to get the big jobs because these Slavic people, the Romanians, the Italians, the Greeks, people that have been banned or very limited for the longest time. Well, native born of native parentage continue to be overrepresented in the agriculture sector in the early 20th century, but they were also well represented in many better jobs in the public and private business that were expanding rapidly with the industrial economy. The management elite during the age of industrialization was almost exclusively native born white. So, okay, what does this mean? Okay, a lot of people, native born people, were still on the farm or around the farm. But as these industrial things grew and they needed more people, the first part of the upper class in the United States, the managers and all these people in these positions were basically almost native born white or native born white male. Very few women were able to get a job. We've seen it in movies. Oh, I'm a native born white American. I may be the plant manager. I got one of these big houses. My kids go to nice schools. My wife stays home and does needlework. Or she keeps an eye on the domestic servants, who prepare my food, clean the house, made the bed. Or she works with some charity to help, the downtrodden in this city. We see them in the movies all the time, all the olden movies. But where was everybody else? A lot of the downtrodden people they were helping were pretty poor native-born white people. Because, again, you had a small group that moved up, leaving the rest behind. It was kind of like the WASP system. Hey, if you owned at least 100 acres of land, you could be up here and you could vote. Let's go back, for example, and look at Keene. Look at the different small companies around Keene that control a lot of stuff, controlled who was coming into town to do business, who couldn't do business. And, they became the country club set, the racquetball, tennis club, But they had an awful lot of white people working for them that weren't getting paid a lot of money. Okay, the magnitude of the impact of immigration and economic growth and welfare depends on the availability of physical capital. The human capital of immigrants and natives and the assumption about economic growth. All thought there was neither a slacking of economic growth nor a slowdown in the trend of rising wages of native-born workers during the mass immigration of the late 19th and 20th century, individual Wilkinson argued that the wages would have grown even faster in the absence of immigration. Difference in the interpretation or speculation of the economic impact of immigrants are typically based on the assumption of possible effects rather than the major difference. And so, what you hear right now about immigration causes wages to go down, takes jobs away from people, those are the same out of the playbook of the 1880s to the 1920s. They are still some of the people who are going out and saying immigration hurt native-born Americans. They would have been paid more and they would have more jobs. And without immigration, we could have took native-born Americans off the farm, put them in the inner cities and put them in the factories and pay them more. Okay? And like the individuals here are saying, are typically based on assumptions of possible effects, based on the assumption of possible effects. So here I am, as far as I'm concerned, I've created a fact. And that fact is from the information I got based on the assumption of possible effects. Okay? So, I'm Tom Brady. I score, I get 48 touchdown passes. But when I go, typically based on the assumption of possible effects, I go, well, if Randy Moss had ran 2.2 seconds faster, or such and such was there, you know, bing. If these individuals would wait there what Tom Brady expected to do, Tom Brady would have scored thrown 60 touchdown passes. Okay? That is typically based on the assumption of possible effects. Yes, if the pass receivers had been where they were supposed to be and caught those passes, Tom Brady throws 60 touchdown passes. If Tom Brady's blocker had done what he's supposed to done, Tom Brady would have thrown 66 touchdown passes. Okay, all those could be factual based on assumptions. So this individual then, I've done my research and I'm saying is immigration in the United States was bad. Immigration in the 1880s to 1920s was bad for native-born white Americans. As far as he's concerned, that is factual. And anybody that agrees, that has his leaning, will read this and will cite him for justification when they say something is factual. The author of this paper says, well, those are all possibilities. Let's look at the numbers. No projection. What are the actual numbers? One of the most fundamental effects of immigration is an increase in the number of workers related to dependents in the population. Immigrants were generally concentrated in the younger working ages. Well over 70% of the immigrants to the United States during the peak years of mass immigration from 1907 to 1910 were between the age of 18 and 40. Even within the work age population, immigrants are more likely to participate in the labor force than the native-born population. If the native-born why didn't the native-born population take these opening jobs that were coming? Why didn't they move from the farms and go take the jobs? Oh, kind of like immigrants only taking jobs that Americans don't want to use. That sounds pretty familiar. When you estimate the savings received to the United States through immigration from 1790 to 1913 related to the cost that would have been incurred if all the immigrations were replaced by the children of native born. Okay? Walker, the other guy, says, well, if we didn't have immigrants, Americans would have more kids. Because of all these immigrants, native-born white Americans had less children. So, what one group of individuals saying, we didn't need over 10 million immigrants because from 1790 to 1993, those 3 million Americans would have produced 100 million children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and stuff. So that's 200. Say, even if we go 10 generations. So what Walker is trying to say, in 10 generations, white Native American people would have grown from 3 million to 100 plus million just by reproducing among themselves. If that happens, a lot of cousins are going to be marrying each other. There's going to have to be a lot of inbreeding to go from 3 million to 100 million. Okay. I know if someone's watching this, they may say, well, I'm being kind of racist or whatever. But when we go from 1790 on, native born, those are white males. Asians, Indians, blacks do not count. Women do not count. Yeah, women are part of that 3 million, but we had a country that revolved around native-born white Americans. And so I'm doing this as an academic, not talking about racial. I'm talking about the cultural makeup of the United States and how, when we're taught, everything derives from the cultural makeup. Okay, immigration had contributed to 13 to 42% of the capital stock in 1912. Several analysts have noted that the large number of immigrants in the North in the 1860s provided manpower surplus that allowed the Union to defeat the South. If you study the Civil War, you'll find out that a lot of immigrants were paid a bounty to join local units to go fight in the war. The manufacturing sector grew much less rapidly, only about 2.5 times as fast as the workforce as a whole, but added 7.5 million jobs between 1880 and 1920. And so, before the age of industrialization, per capita productivity rarely increased by having large numbers of works concentrated in one area. Artisan labor in most industries, such as grain mill and ironworking, leather goods, did not rely on complex division of labor. Overall, there was few advantages of locating a factory in the city. So we're getting ready to end this part for now. But this is the way history is supposed to be taught. Okay, so when I'm reading this, the authors are saying, well, this is what one group are believing, and this is what another group is believing. But when we look at the actual data, whether it's government, federal government, or local data, this is the opinion we come from. So right here is, so I'm reading, I got 3 sets of facts. And my part as a reader is to look at all these facts and determine, I can go and say, wait a minute, I think all of them are right, but they're too stuck on themselves. So that's it for this week.